Here on the ground, change happens fast. Problems feel frequent and urgent. It's loud and anxiety runs high. From a satellite view, the Earth looks the same as it did thousands of years ago. We've been here before. Let's learn from our past and shoot for a better future.
Hello again and welcome back to A Satellite View. I'm your host, Todd Mikkelson, and I'm speaking at you on a Thursday evening, August 10th, 2023, from the Space and Time Continuum. What people are talking about right now is waiting for Fani Willis to do another indictment of Trump, likely to happen next week. Was speculated it might happen this week, but at this point it looks like it'll probably be next week. Other stuff that I want to talk about is the popularity of Joe Biden is being considered a lot by Democrats. And I just think that's, I don't think we're getting the message. I mean, some of us are. Maybe if you're listening to this, you are getting the message. I know I am getting the message. And the message is there have been an awful lot of referendums that are reactions to the Roe v. Wade knockdown by the Supreme Court. I think there have been 38 special elections held so far just in 2023 that Democrats have overperformed in. And that story only comes up when these things happen. So just on Tuesday, there was an incredible turnout in Ohio. So now people are back to talking about, oh, wow, the Democrats are still really emboldened. They're still really fired up. Yeah. Yes. Yes, we are. Not just Democrats. A vast, overwhelming majority of Americans are still very fired up about the fact that the United States Supreme Court took away existing freedoms from women, but it very much affects men as well. And, you know, everybody's thinking about what's next. Marriage equality, LGBTQ is constantly under fire from idiots like Meatball Ron. He's going after the LGBTQ, and some people don't like it. I can't decide yet if I do. When I ran in 2016, I said, no, people can use whatever bathroom they want, but now I don't know where I am on it. All I'm thinking about is trying to stay out of jail. So, of course, you know, Trump he's absolutely spreading horrible lies about people like Fani Willis at this point. That's another subject. Now, my friend and my congressman, Dean Phillips, went on TV this Sunday, and he said that we need competition within the Democratic Party, and that some people, they know who they are, who are in a good position to run for president, should step into the race and primary against Joe Biden. I don't agree with, I do agree with the sentiment. I don't agree with it right now. And I'll tell you why. And as we go back in history and look at mistakes the Democrats have made over the decades. In 1968, there was a horrible mess that ended up happening with the Democratic pool of contenders for the presidency. The height of the horribleness was, of course, when Bobby Kennedy got murdered. He was destined to be the next president, and that's what everybody thought. But he was murdered in June of that election year, 1968. And then we had two Minnesotans, Gene McCarthy and Hubert Humphrey. Gene McCarthy was kind of saying, hey, we need a more liberal candidate. Again, I love him. I like him a lot more than I like Hubert Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey did a lot of great things for the state of Minnesota and for the country. So I very much like Hubert Humphrey too, but he was a horrible candidate. He was horrible at running national campaigns. He primaried against John F. Kennedy in 1960, and I've seen a lot of footage of both of them campaigning in that year, and Hubert Humphrey just did not have a clue that the world had changed into a modern thing. He looked like he was from the 1930s, and John F. Kennedy looked like he was from the future. But then Hubert Humphrey becomes the vice president under Lyndon Johnson when John F. Kennedy got murdered. So he was supposedly the shoo-in to be the nominee in 1968. Well, Eugene McCarthy said, I think we need to go further to the liberal side. Progressive. They weren't using the word progressive yet, but that's basically what it was. Liberalism means moving forward, progressing. Totally agree with him. But I think the fact that he did that in 1968 made it so that Nixon could win. Nixon, of course, cheated. That's a whole nother subject that we've got. We're working on a series about all of the Republican cheating going on ever since Eisenhower. Eisenhower is the last voted-in legitimate president for the Republicans. They've all cheated since then in many ways. So that played a part, but also the fact that the Democrats did not have their feces together yet in 1968. Nixon was cheating because he knew he couldn't win fairly. The Republicans knew they could not win a fair election nationally in the United States, even back then, more than 50 years ago. And we kept letting them. The way I put it is we need to bury the fascists. The Republican Party is a fascist party. Has been for a while, certainly is now. We need to bury the fascists deep enough so their hand can't reach back up through the dirt and reemerge. We let them reemerge in 1968. We let them still zombie their way back into the White House in 1972. Again, a lot of cheating going on. Whole lot of cheating going on in the barn. Who's barn? Nixon's barn. Yeah, I apologize for that little breakout. I didn't have the piano going, so it's probably nobody knows what I was actually trying to do there. My apologies. Anyway, then Nixon's pardoned for all of his crimes so that the rest of the ensuing Republican presidential nominees are like, hey, we can keep criming. Looks like we can get away with it. We can, if we get caught, we can be pardoned. So in 1980, the election when Jimmy Carter was the sitting president, which is always the easiest way to win a re-election when you have a sitting president. Edward Kennedy actually decided, no, I think we need a more liberal. Again, totally agree. But you weakened our candidate, and Reagan won and proceeded to ruin the American economy, American culture, proceeded to ruin the world. It could very well be argued that a huge part of our immigration problem is because of Reagan and his policies in South America, some of which were illegal. He tried to keep them secret because they were illegal. Iran-Contra. Through history, we've had people that I always agree with. 2016, Bernie Sanders. I was a big Bernie Sanders fan for more than 15 years by the time we got to 2016. But I was sick of hearing his voice, his old man pointing finger. I'm the guy to deliver. I'm the guy that the young people want. No, you're not, Bernie. Love your ideas. Totally agree 100% with everything you have to say about how you think things should be in the American economy, things for workers, unions, the wealthy paying their fair share. But did you ruin it by, they need to pay their fair share. Saying that in an old man pointy finger voice for 15 years did not work. Bernie Sanders did not get any of Bernie Sanders' issues passed into law. Joe Biden did. Yes, Joe Biden did a lot because of Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders was not able to do that. And then Bernie Sanders injured our candidate in 2016. And we have Trump then coming into the White House. Again, totally agree with Bernie Sanders. I totally agree with Dean Phillips. I know he's more liberal in real life than he is on TV or, when he's in Washington, D.C. He's trying to do the bipartisan thing in Washington, D.C. I don't completely agree with him and how he's doing that. But he's good at trying to do that, and he's good at talking about it, but it's not what we want to hear. He's actually kind of being the anti-Bernie at this point. It's like, Dean, we need to be more liberal, not more centrist. But a big part of, I think, what Dean Phillips was doing on TV this last weekend, that I think is kind of just going to be forgotten about by everybody, was partially worried about Joe Biden's popularity and Joe Biden's age. What about, another question is, what about Kamala Harris? Okay, what about her instead of an unknown who hasn't even announced that they have an interest yet? I want to vote for AOC for my president in the future, but I want to vote for Kamala Harris for president in the future. She was the one that I wanted to be our candidate in 2020. I didn't want Joe Biden. But now Joe Biden has proven to be the guy for the times. Part of it is because he is so old and he has no more F's to give. So he's, hey, I'm going to run for re-election, but after that, man, I'm done. I'm not trying to please any lobbyist for a future. I'm sick of this BS. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to work for the worker. And look what he's done. He's passed a huge portion of what Bernie Sanders has been talking about, and by the way, only talking about, for the last 20 or more years. Now, worried about the presidential election. If you've been listening to my podcast, or if you've heard me on AM 950 as I sit in on the Matt McNeil show, like I did this last Monday, and I talked about this very thing, you know that I'm not worried about the 2024 presidential election. Joe Biden is going to win. And, he is old, but he's pretty healthy. He's way more healthy than Donald Trump, who's only like a year and a half or 2 years younger than Joe Biden. I don't know why nobody's talking about how old Trump is. Everybody's talking about how old Biden is. Nobody's talking about how old Trump is. Biden's riding a bike. Trump can't even walk down a ramp. He's an obese, unhealthy stress bundle. Whereas Biden's kind of a happy-go-lucky grandpa who likes ice cream and riding bikes. Who do you think's going to live longer? But anyway. So I'm saying, yeah, Joe Biden's old. Anyone could have something happen that would make them unable to run, in the next 15 months. But if everything's going the way that it is now, Joe Biden's going to win the White House. And if not Joe Biden, I think Kamala Harris could win the White House. And a lot of it is because in Ohio, on Tuesday night, by a 10% margin, Democrats improved their performance. And that's just one. This is after the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. Kansas rejected a state constitutional amendment that would have said there is no right to an abortion on August 2nd, 2022, just a month and a half after the Supreme Court knocked it down. Then, on election night, November 8th, there was 5 states, Vermont, Montana, Michigan, Kentucky, and California. Vermont passed a state constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to an abortion. So did Michigan. So did California. And in the very extremely red states of Kentucky and Montana, they rejected amending the state constitution to include language saying it does not protect the right to an abortion. Then in Ohio, August 8th, just this last Tuesday, 2023, rejected a measure that would have made it harder to pass an abortion rights constitutional amendment. Technically, it was different than that, but it was because Ohioans wanted, they're going to bring up a measure this November, and they want to ratify Roe v. Wade in their constitution. And the Republicans knew that they would be successful at that because it's overwhelmingly popular. And Ohioans support women's reproductive rights, more than 57%. And this measure that would have made it harder to pass that. So the Republicans trying to change the rules because they know they're going to lose. It passed 57 to 43, 14-point margin. Blew everyone's mind. I'm kind of asking, why did that blow your mind? Kansas blew everyone's mind. That was the first one. And it was like, okay, that blew my mind. Overwhelmingly supporting women's reproductive rights in Kansas, Montana, Kentucky. So why is it blowing your mind? Democrats, especially Gen Z, is turning out in mind-blowingly overwhelming amounts over and over again. So now that it's happened 38 times just in this year, again, Wisconsin, just a month ago or so, blew everyone's mind. My mind's not being blown anymore. I can see it coming because it's coming over and over and over again. In the suburbs of Ohio on a hot Tuesday evening, hot Tuesday day in August, when most people are vacationing, the turnout in the suburbs of the big cities in Ohio was the same as it is on presidential election night. That never has happened before, except for like 38 times just this year. So, okay, can we stop trying to scare ourselves over this? Of course, we got to turn out the vote. I don't want us to sit on our hands and think that everything's in the bag. But everybody's proving that we're not doing that. Okay, I'm overdue for a break. I'm going to talk more about this because I'm not finished yet. When we come back, you're listening to A Satellite View. I'm Todd Mikkelson. We'll be right back. Satellite View, Todd Mikkelson with you here. And a reminder that the music you hear on this podcast, you can find at toddmikkelson.com. Go to the music link, and you can find this and much more music that I have recorded when I was working in music over the last decades. I'm actually working on some brand new stuff. Maybe I'll see if it's fitting for this Satellite View podcast. But anyway, we were talking about the fact that so many people are saying that, oh, Biden, his poll numbers are down. Again, polls. Gen Z is not taking part of these polls. You can't really poll Gen Z. And Gen Z keeps all of these different elections turning out, and then everybody's mind is blown. Wow, that was not what the polls said. That's what they've been saying starting in 2018. That's not what the polls said. The Democrats, okay, so I'm going to read from an ABC News article. Looking ahead to, and I just want to point out that all the people, there's a couple people that are really on this stuff, but other pundits on YouTube and cable news and stuff, they keep talking about that Democrats don't want Biden to be their nominee. My friend Dean Phillips started to do that this weekend. I don't see it. All of the accomplishments, I don't have that list ready here, but it's a couple pages long. Just today, Kamala Harris was out there putting forth in Pennsylvania the fact that Joe Biden's trying to bring back a 1931 New Deal issue about making sure that workers get good wages, get paid right. The details are very, complex, and maybe I'll go through that in the next podcast or something. I'm not going to do that now, but of course, who got rid of that measure? Ronald Reagan. The Reagan administration got rid of that, I think, in 1983. Joe Biden wants to bring it back, and what it would basically do is Joe Biden's noticing the administration, including Kamala Harris, by the way, is noticing that, there's a lot of money going into a lot of projects, construction projects, building factories so that we can, make solar panels and windmills and chips. So, bringing jobs back to the United States. And then we're building all this stuff. Well, a lot of these factories are being built in the South where workers are not supported very well. They're not unionized. They're paid way less because they're migrants, and the corporations down there are like, these are just animals. We're just going to pay them as little as possible. Well, Joe Biden's trying to make sure that the workers get a good wage all over the whole country and don't get ripped off because they're down in the South. It's a pretty big deal. That's just one of the many things, not to mention the fact that there's so much. I mean, my brother talked about, he lives up near Brainerd in northern Minnesota, a road going to his house that was just horrible. I've driven on it, and it's like, geez, what's with this road? Being redone. The roads around my house were redone last summer. I mean, things are we're rebuilding our infrastructure. The Republicans have been blocking that for decades, and we're rebuilding our infrastructure. Okay, now, I'm going to read from this ABC News article. Looking ahead to 2024, Democrats concede some cause for concern, including President Joe Biden's anemic approval rating and early polls forecasting a repeat race against former President Donald Trump, in which Biden either ties or trails. Due in part to a notable chunk of undecided voters and apprehension over Biden's age and acuity, which he has repeatedly dismissed. Now, I agree with Biden in dismissing that. It's like, hey, man, none of us here are worried, okay? We're getting everything done. We're getting the stuff done that we said we were going to get done. Democrats keep saying, Joe Biden's going to lose. Trump's going to be president again. Joe Biden he's too old and he's polling. How many Gen Z, how many people between the age of 18 and 45 were even in your poll? What's the percentage? 2%? Or is that a little high? So then going on with this article in ABC News. But Democrats also say that based on 2023 so far, they see plenty of reason for optimism about their chances with voters. Duh! An analysis from 538 found that in 38 special elections held so far this year, Democrats have outperformed the partisan lean of the areas where the races were held by an average of 10%. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. 38 special elections just this year in 2023. That doesn't even include the Kansas one in 2022. In 38 special elections held so far this year, Democrats have outperformed the partisan lean of the areas where the races were held by an average of 10%. That is mind-blowingly blowing everything out of the water. That's just absolutely incredible. Also cutting down on GOP margins in red cities and counties. For instance, the Democratic candidate in a Wisconsin State Assembly special election last month lost by just 7 points in an area where Republicans have a 22-point edge and where Trump beat Biden by almost 17 points in 2020. In a New Hampshire special election in May for a state House seat, the Democrat won by 43 points, far beyond the party's estimated 23-point edge in the district. So that's a blue district. They thought, okay, we're going to win by 23 points. They won by 43 points. The data from the 538 does not include regulatory scheduled off-year elections, including the Wisconsin Supreme Court race earlier this year in which the liberal candidate won by 11 points. She didn't just win. Wisconsin always has wafer-thin election margins, and normally she would have lost, but she won. And she didn't win wafer-thin. She won by 11 points. Ben Knuckles, a Wisconsin Democratic strategist, said, I think when you look at things like this, one special election doesn't mean much on its own. But when you start to see real consistency, it can certainly become predictive of the next election cycle. I go back to what I've been saying about if the Republicans had the best candidate they've ever had in 2024, and the Democrats had a really bad candidate, like we have had Michael Dukakis, John Kerry, I don't know, Al Gore was not a very good candidate, and he actually won the election after they finished counting. It wasn't allowed to be official. He actually won both the Electoral College and the popular vote in 2000, but the Republicans cheated. They went against Florida law and had the Supreme Court make a ruling on the count in Florida. That, again, a whole nother thing that we're not going to go into right now. But take our worst candidate against their best candidate in 2024. Then ask their best candidate, will you support a national ban on abortion when you become president? And they lose. They lose the election, no matter what they say after that. Ron DeSantis would probably say, when people are, we're going to make Florida, we're going to make America Florida, and we're going to. Tim Scott would say, Democrats want abortion to be legal up to the 52nd week. He said that actually in real life. He said that. And if you're wondering why that's a problem, 52 weeks is a full year. And a pregnancy is 9 months. If you're still pregnant in the 52nd week of your pregnancy, there's something going very wrong. Anyway, that answer, of course, is not going to work. But if they say, no, I will not support it, then they lose their base and they lose Republican votes. If they say, yes, I will support it, then they lose the vote of 80% of America. The Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade, it's the Dobbs ruling officially, but basically it's known as getting rid of Roe v. Wade as a constitutional right. They took away the rights of Americans. That has doomed the Republican Party. It has doomed the Republican Party. Back after the crash in 1929 that led to the Depression in the 30s, the Republicans were lost in the forest for decades. Didn't have power in the United States for decades. I think this goes beyond that. I think this is worse for them than that. I think this will extinct their party. I don't think anyone with the moniker of being a Republican will be able to win an election. Ever. I think they need to reemerge. It's like when the Whigs went south and the Republicans emerged from that. By the way, back then, the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln was a liberal. He was called a liberal. The people who hated him were the conservatives. They're the ones who broke off from the country and started the Civil War. The Republican Party was the liberal party at the time, and they were labeled as the liberal party at the time. You can look this up. So I love it when Republicans say, we're the party of Lincoln. You are the opposite. That's a whole nother subject that's acutely interesting as well, but we're not talking about that right now. How did it shift? How did the parties shift? What the Democrats used to be the conservatives, the Republicans used to be the liberals. How did that shift? Well, it took a very, very long time, and it's kind of complicated, but also very interesting. Maybe we'll do a series on that too. I'm thinking of trying to put together some, not just individual episodes that keep up on the current news like this episode is doing, but doing series of subjects that are, more drawn out and they're historical. They go over a very long and complicated swath of information and making it into a multi-episode series. That's what the planning has been going on for this podcast, which is called A Satellite View. I'm Todd Mikkelson, your host, and we're out of time, but I hope to be back speaking at you in a week. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to A Satellite View with Todd Mikkelson. Go to toddmikkelson.com for links and more information.